Travel Light by Naomi Mitchison. Chapter 1, The Bears. It is said that when the new queen saw the old queen's baby daughter, she told the king that the brat must be got rid of at once. And the king, who by now had almost forgotten the old queen and had scarcely looked at the baby, agreed and thought no more about it. And that would have been the end of that baby girl, but that her nurse, Matuli, came to hear of it. Now this nurse was from Finnmark, and like many others from thereabouts, was apt to take on the shape of an animal from time to time. So she turned herself into a black bear then and there, and picked up the baby in her mouth, blanket and all, and growled her way out of the bower at the back of the king's hall, and patted out through the light spring snow that had melted already near the hall, and through the birch woods and the pine woods into the deep dark woods where the rest of the bears were waking up from their winter sleep. Now when anyone changes into a bear, it is bearish they become, and the nurse Matuli was the same. Little Hala crawled around with the bear cubs, and many a knock she got from hard claws and many a lick from rough tongues. She learned to fight the other cubs, and having the use of her hands, she would get her own back from time to time, pulling ears and scrambling onto black bears, and sometimes she wondered when her legs would grow. She got to know the thought and language of the bears. It was a language that did what it wanted to do well enough, so that there were many ways of showing the difference between one taste and another, the taste of crunched mice, the taste of many different berries and roots, and the taste of honey either on the front, back, or sides of the tongue. It did the same for smells, and the forest was always speaking in smells to the bears. It did much for hearing and something for sight, but there was no way, for instance, to think about clouds or the flying of eagles, because the bears did not look up into the sky. And if anyone had wanted to explain to the bears about Hala and her stepmother, they would just not have been able to do it at all. There were plenty of other wild beasts in the woods, wolves and foxes and martens, reindeer and elks and reindeer and hares. But most of them kept clear of the bears, and some of the woods were full of tangles and hollows and mosses, scented with crushed ferns, rich earth scooped for sweet shoots and young mushrooms, birds' nests full of warm eggs, and the thick, friendly fur of bears. Matuli Bear looked after Hala Bear as well as any bear can be expected to look after any baby. Hala had plenty to eat, a long tongue to wash her, and a warm bear to cuddle against all night. But Matuli was a fine figure of a she-bear, and the he-bears all wanted her to keep house for them. It came on for winter, and behind rocks and under fallen fir trees were deep and cozy dens waiting for Matuli and her bear husband. The nights got longer and colder, and every morning Matuli found it harder and harder to wake up. But Hala woke and fidgeted and pulled Matuli's whiskers and wanted her breakfast. And it came back to Matuli that one of the queer things about human beings was that they did not sensibly sleep all winter, but instead went to a great deal of trouble to cut fuel and shear sheep and weave blankets and thick cloaks and make themselves hot soup. And Hala, in spite of her excellent upbringing, was going to take after the rest of them. What was a poor bear to do? And then a very fortunate thing happened. Matuli and her bear husband were walking through the woods, looking for the last of the wild bees' honey on a late fledgling from a nest, and Matuli's husband was grumbling away to himself because he could feel that the snow was not far off, and it was time to go home to the den and sleep. But Hala was running around like a crazy butterfly and clearly had no intention of sleeping. Sometimes the he-bear thought it would be both nice and sensible to eat Hala, but he did not dare because of Matuli. And suddenly a deer came galloping past them, looking back over its shoulders in terrible fright. And after that a badger, which was in a hurry too. But the badger had time to tell the two bears that there was a dragon coming along, and they had better get out of the way. The he-bear turned round at once and went galumphing back. Never had his den seemed so desirable. But Matuli sat among the cranberry bushes in the wet mounds and pulled Hala down beside her. Sure enough, in a little while the dragon came along, puffing, creaking, and rattling. Matuli in the bushes coughed and said, "My lord," for she knew in her mind that dragons appreciated politeness from the rest of the world. This dragon was somewhat startled and blew out a flame, which singed the tops of the cranberry bushes and the tips of the fur all along Matuli's back. But he'd meant no harm, and he stopped and listened very graciously to Matuli's story about Hala Bearsbane. Matuli was speaking in the language of humans, since the thing could not be explained in bear's language. But dragons are, within their limits, very intelligent, and most of them understand not only the language of several kinds of animals, including the birds who have beautiful feelings but few facts, but also the languages of trolls, dwarves, giants, and human beings. Now, if there is one kind of human being which dragons dislike more than another, it's the kind commonly called kings or heroes. The reason is that they are almost always against dragons. So when the dragon, whose name was Oogie, heard that the poor little pink human had been so badly treated by a king and a queen, he did not hesitate, but said at once that he would adopt Hala Bearsbane and see that she grew up in all the right principles of dragonhood. "And you will see that she gets regular meals, my lord?" said Matuli. "Have you ever heard of dragons going hungry?" said Oogie. "And you will see that she doesn't fall into the fire, my lord?" "I will fireproof her myself," the dragon said. "And you will comb her hair every night, my lord?" "I will comb it with my own claws," said the dragon, "for I see that the child has hair the color of gold, which is the only right color for hair." "And you will dry her eyes when she cries, my lord?" "I will dry her eyes with the silken scarf of the princess of the Spice Lands, who was so thoughtfully offered to my cousin, the dragon of the great waste. For I see that the child has eyes the color of sapphires, which is the only right color for eyes." "What happened to the prince of the Spice Lands, my lord?" asked Matuli, for she thought that this princess might be a nice playmate for her Hala. The dragon coughed behind his claw. "The princess of the Spice Lands was offered to my cousin by the populace. It was a very suitable and acceptable idea on their part. Unfortunately, there was a hero sent to interfere with everybody's best interests. In the result, the princess and the hero perished. My poor cousin had a nasty jag over one eye. He gave me the scarf in exchange for a duplicate bracelet which I had acquired. Yes, yes." And Oogie the dragon held out a glittering claw to Hala, who caught hold and swung. "And you'll see she's warm at night, my lord?" said Matuli, anxious to do her duty, but thinking more and more pleasantly of the comfortable den and the uninterrupted sleep that waited for her. "She will be quite warm, and what is more," said the dragon, "she will always have a night light, because I am proud to say that we dragons always breathe out of our noses while we are asleep." He then put Hala up to his back, where she held on by the spikes and shouted with pleasure, because now she could see right up into the trees. Suddenly the thought of her den and her husband and her long sleep were too much for Matuli Bear, and she tried to curtsy to the dragon, but that's too difficult for bears. So she just turned her large black back and went crashing back through the cranberry bushes and into the forest. Oogie the dragon raised his eyebrows and looked over his shoulder at Hala and winked slowly from the side of his eye across in the same way that a crocodile winks, and then quickly up and down the same way as an eagle, for he had something of the nature of both. But Hala was delighted with it and dug her bare heels into the scaly sides of the dragon, who went slithering and crackling off through the forest, every now and then accidentally setting fire to a bush or a drift of dry birch or oak leaves, or singeing the fur of one of the animals which was too proud or too stupid to get out of the way.